With the capture of Alexander's corpse by Ptolemy, the alliances that had formed in the aftermath of the partition of Babylon were sundered, resulting in the outbreak of open conflict. While trying to maintain the facade of a united empire on paper, the Diadochi were now building their own power bases and launched forth into the battlefields of Eurasia. Perdikkas, a self-appointed guardian of the throne of Alexander, thundered through the courts of Babylon, demanding Ptolemy's slight be corrected. The alliance against Perdikkas, composed of Antigonos, Antipater and Kretopolis, called foul of his actions and declared they would not support him. The 1,000 nations of the Achaemenid Empire and the Balkans watched in awe and terror as elephants were mustered and horizon-spanning armies marched to battle. The first war of the Diadochi had begun, and the skies above had begun to thunder at the impending Titanomachy. Welcome to our second video on the Wars of the Diadochi, looking at the First War and the power alliances that were forged. This video is made available for free thanks to our YouTube members and patrons. We fund our free content through our program of exclusive videos made for our members and patrons, who get 2 documentaries per week not available to the public. We've got a growing collection featuring the First Punic War, the history of Prussia, the Italian Unification Wars, and a review of the classic text Xenophon's Anabasis. We're now covering the Russo-Japanese War and Albigensian Crusades, not to mention our massive Pacific War week-by-week coverage, and a massive pool of other projects. All this is made for and with generous donations from our backers, so if you're enjoying our content and want to see more and support the cause of history, consider becoming a YouTube member or patron. You'll also get early access to public content, a spot in our lively Discord server, and behind-the-scenes info and goodies. We rely on our backers to support our growing team pumping out these videos, so thank you to everyone already involved, and we hope you'll consider joining in too. Antigonos, the governor of Phrygia, joined Antipater after receiving incriminating letters written by Perdikkas, which revealed that he was scheming to discard his wife Nicaea, who was Antipater's daughter, in order to marry Alexander's sister Cleopatra. Even before this, Antigonos had disliked Perdikkas, as did Ptolemy, due to frictions in personal and likely courtly relationships. This event spurred Antigonos to begin mustering his troops to cross into Asia and overthrow Perdikkas, thus commencing the war. On his end, Perdikkas was not without friends. Eumenes, who had received and subsequently tamed the restless province of Cappadocia, was allied with him, as were some other generals like Antigenes, Python and Seleucus. Archidaeus, henceforth known as Philip III, was likely still in Babylon with his half-niece wife Eurydice. The tale of how the couple married is noteworthy in itself, and we discuss it here. Eurydice was the daughter of Alexander's half-sister by an Illyrian warrior princess, Kinani, and King Amyntas IV. Kinani had already begun marching on Babylon as soon as she heard of Philip's ascent, but Perdikkas, terrified that he would lose power should she arrive, as the fierce princess could assume an active political role in her capacity as queen, sent his brother Alcetus to confront her. Alcetus killed the fearless princess in the commotion, but his troops, disturbed at the death of a royal of Macedon, revolted against him and then brought Eurydice to be married. Kiani, Eurydice, and other Argead princesses like Thessaloniki and Cleopatra were fearless and scheming in their own right, and had ancient Macedon society been less decidedly patriarchal, they might have achieved as much as Alexander himself. Perdikkas had 2 fronts to fight on, Egypt and Asia Minor. As Eumenes was in Cappadocia, it was far better for him to be dispatched to deal with Kretopolis and Antigonos. He himself assembled his generals and marched on from Babylon. Ptolemy was expecting this, and using his newfound resources in the bureaucracy of Egypt, began to fortify the borders of the Nile. Perdikkas marched through Syria and then into Palestine, and from the lands of Baal and Elohim moved down to the Sinai Peninsula. In 321 BCE, he arrived near the city of Pelusium, on the easternmost riverbank of the Nile. Opposite him, the Ptolemaic troops under Ptolemy, who ran the central command, were poised like Ra and the Egyptian gods to face the snake Apophis. Garrisons were staged across the river, prepared to meet the pretender emperor, while the major Ptolemaic force was mobile and ready to move at will to any part of the front. Perdikkas began to look for a good place to cross, but could find nothing as Ptolemy was following his every move from across the Nile. Perdikkas understood that if the rebels gained strongholds in their satrapies, things would escalate, and the war would drag out indefinitely. Unable to afford this, he chose to become Apophis, and, channeling the stealthiness of the titular snake, moved upriver under the cover of darkness to find a place to cross while evading Ptolemy's detection. That night, the only light came from the moon, as the Greek goddess Selene, Egyptian god Khonsu, and Arabian goddess Allat were all playing Senate in the crescent's trip throughout the stars. All night, the army of Perdikkas marched until they reached a fort called Camel's Rampart, where a small garrison had been placed in accordance with Ptolemaic strategy. Before Selene, Khonshu and Allat departed to greet the dawn deities Eos, Rakepri and Shahar, Perdikkas assembled his forces and attacked the fort. His Indian elephants were in front, while the silver shields were straight behind, ready to scale the walls with ladders. Meanwhile, Perdikkas himself was at the rear flank with his cavalry. It appeared like the perfect plan, combining the might of the elephants to pressure the defenders and use the silver shields to scale the walls. However, Ptolemy had managed to catch up with the speed of the Greek god Hermes and the wings of the Egyptian goddess Nephthys. Entering the fort, the governor of Egypt pushed the attackers back. Perdikkas, ever desperate, threw his elephants and silver shields against the Camel Rampart's walls. After multiple waves of assault upon the now fully garrisoned walls and high casualties on both sides, Perdikkas decided to retreat and find a hotspot further down south for his crossing. He eventually found the site of Memphis, where a small island lay between the two riverbanks, but the current and depth made the crossing incredibly challenging. Perdikkas put forth his elephants in a line next to the islet and used their massive size to lower the current, and in front of them placed the cavalry to pick up any stragglers in the current. His troops began to march to the island, and initially some of them succeeded. The problem was that the sinking sand of the river almost made the elephants and horses lose their footing, and thus they retreated back to the shore. A large contingent of the force was now stranded, and a desperate Perdikkas summoned them back through a much deeper Nile. While some survived, a lot of soldiers perished. Much like Caligula would centuries later, Perdikkas had fought a battle with water and lost. The campaign to recover the body of Alexander in Egypt and restore order to the Macedonian Empire was in complete chaos, and perhaps understandably, Perdikkas's soldiers were extremely angry. His chief allies, such as Antigenes, Python and Seleucus, were now convinced that Perdikkas was criminally incompetent. Seeing that the soldiers were angry and out for blood, these three decided to restore order the only way they knew how, entering Perdikkas's tent and killing him, unceremoniously ending the life of the regent of Babylon in the first year of the Wars of the Diadochi. Perdikkas was ultimately a competent but unfortunate man. He was indeed skilled in both court politics and in putting down rebellions, and proved as much during his prime when he fought alongside Alexander. But in the end, he could not face so many misfortunes in the cutthroat world of Hellenistic generalship. The three generals packed up and left Egypt, leaving Ptolemy to return to his newfound empire and eagerly begin mixing Egyptian and Greek customs for a new age. On the northern fronts, there was absolute chaos as well. Eumenes had lost control of the fleet, whose sailors saw Perdikkas as a weak and scheming king. They thus defected and moved to the European side of the Hellespont to help Antigonos, Antipater and Craterus. Alcetus, alongside other generals, was not willing to serve under Eumenes, and a certain Neoptolemus even mutinied. He fled from Eumenes after losing the short battle and marched to join Antipater. After receiving Neoptolemus, Antipater split his forces in two, himself going east and then south towards Egypt, while Craterus stayed in Anatolia to fight Eumenes. Eumenes had some local troops under the command of the Persian satrap Pharnabazos III, who amassed his cavalry and a certain Phoenix of Tenedos. He had approximately 20,000 troops, while Craterus and Neoptolemus also had around 20,000 troops to command. The combination of Persian troops was helpful for Eumenes, but he also knew that many of the Macedonian troops respected and feared Craterus, a notorious general and skilled tactician. Craterus was part of the infamous left flank of the Battle of Issos, and participated in campaigns with Alexander all over Asia and all the way to India, where he commanded the rear in the Battle of Hydaspes. His conduct in the Lamian War, while likely unknown in detail by the soldiers in the east, further provided his credentials. Eumenes knew that a fight between Macedonians would not be welcomed by his soldiers, and devised a plan worthy of Sisyphus. When the two armies met somewhere in Phrygia to fight the famous Battle of the Hellespont, Eumenes lied to his men. He told the troops that they would not be fighting Craterus but Neoptolemus, whom they already saw as a traitor. He then took the Thracians and Asians, who had no respect for Craterus, a man they knew little of, and positioned them all as cavalry on the left flank, facing Craterus's right flank. This was unusual, for this position was usually reserved for Macedonian nobles, who saw it as an honourable position. Eumenes' long centre line was composed of a small contingent of Macedonian phalangists as its core and local mercenaries surrounding them. Eumenes himself went on the right flank with the Cappadocians, who now respected him. On the other end of the field, Craterus placed himself alongside his companions on the right wing flank, with a large corps of Macedonian infantry at the centre. This centre was placed in pike formation, while Neoptolemus was on the left flank opposite Eumenes with cavalry. Craterus is said to have marched forth first from his flank, and at that moment Eumenes commenced his double flank assault. The Thracians sprung forth and clashed with Craterus, while Eumenes went forth to face Neoptolemus. The distance made sure that none of the Macedonians on Eumenes' side heard Craterus' voice. Craterus met his end that day, either falling from his horse and being trampled, or merely dying from the brutal cavalry combat. So ended the life of the great general, causing his cavalry flank to disband in chaos. On the other side of the battle, Eumenes and Neoptolemus' troops were engaged in mortal combat, and the two generals sought to fight each other. Eventually they saw each other and shot forth into the deep. In the ensuing battle, the older and more experienced Eumenes defeated and killed Neoptolemus, severing the generalship on both sides of the enemy army. Thus, Eumenes was triumphant once more. The Macedonian enemy troops joined him at first, after Eumenes offered them amnesty and a chance to join him, but soon after they changed their minds, fleeing towards Antipater. The troops in Egypt had sided with Ptolemy in the end, and the three generals were also in the country. Antipater initially hoped to get Ptolemy as regent, but the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty refused. The best way to solve this impasse, as well as acknowledge the power of Python, Seleucus and Antigenes, was the partition of Triparadeisos of 321 BC, when the generals met in the titular town of Triparadeisos in modern-day Lebanon. A key unresolved issue at this meeting was that Eumenes was not invited, but we will get to that later. In this conclave of generalissimos, the empire was redivided. Seleucus, who had managed to secure his position, began negotiations with Antipater. To the dismay of Eurydice, Philip III was made co-regent alongside Python, for Roxane's baby son, Alexander IV, was to move with his mother to Pella in Macedon. Seleucus became governor of Babylon, which would serve him well in future endeavours, and Antigenes received Susa. Antigonos received multiple Anatolian satrapies, and other less seminal generals and local nobles received or maintained their satrapies. Antigonos, having received regions like Phrygia, was also entrusted with one more task, defeating the lone rebel Eumenes. To that end, he set forth from Triparadeisos and moved back north to the lands where Phrygians and Greeks mingled. As his enemies advanced on him, an increasingly isolated Eumenes was desperately seeking allies. Perdikkas' brother Alcetus was an obvious choice, despite their differences, so he went to Pisidia to discuss a potential partnership with him. Unfortunately, both wished to rule the army, and after much headbutting, Eumenes left with his troops, presumably after pillaging and stealing all the souvlaki from Alcetus' camp. It was now a deadly game of cat and mouse in the depths of Anatolia, where the ghosts of Xenophon's 10,000 roamed in Hittite and Lydian ruins alongside the shade of Croesus. Antigonos continued to march, trying to hunt Eumenes down. In a mysterious place called Orkyina, Eumenes decided to make a final stand. However, the sly old fox Antigonos was not going to fight without some Odyssean tricks of his own. We know little about this specific battle, but Antigonos and Eumenes likely both employed typical formations of cavalry on their flanks and typical Macedonian phalanxes in their centres. Antigonos elongated his phalanxes by having them halve in length, causing the enemy forces of Eumenes to think that the Antigonid army had been empowered by an even more powerful barrage of reinforcements. As the armies prepared to fight, yet another misfortune struck Eumenes. Apollonides, his cavalry commander from the other flank, deserted and joined Antigonos. The Antigonids routed the Eumenidean force and caused mass catastrophe in the ensuing battle. Eumenes and his remnants escaped and went to the east, to the fortress of Nora. On the way, he was chased by the elder Antigonos, but Eumenes managed to avoid further battles, even going so far as sending a secret message to one of Antigonos' generals, Menander, to hide their baggage so Eumenes' own troops wouldn't get out of control and loot it. Eventually, Eumenes reached Nora and hid within its walls. Antigonos surrounded him and besieged the city, but there was still another remnant faction to deal with, that of Alcetus. Thus he left a token force to continue the siege and went west to Pisidia to snuff out the flames of Perdican disorder. We know very little of the so-called Battle of Kretopolis, but there are some details we can go off to recreate a relatively consistent play-by-play. Alcetus, as well as his allies Attulos, Dokimos and Polymon, were amassing their forces to try and gain a foothold in Anatolia and had taken control of a pass near Kretopolis. Antigonos' forces consisted of 40,000 infantry, 7,000 cavalry and 200 elephants, as opposed to Alcetus' forces, which numbered around 20,000. Diadoros mentioned that Antigonos' army managed to march through most of Anatolia in 7 days, a feat of incredible endurance and discipline. Antigonos' troops, like an army of solid snakes and Sam Fishers, arrived so quickly that the enemy was completely surprised. The trumpets of the elephant troops were the first thing that Alcetus' troops heard, and they realized that they were completely screwed. Antigonos seized some nearby hills and managed to gain the higher ground. Antigonos and Dokimos formed their phalanxes, but Alcetus, with the cavalry and the peltasts, summited the hills on the ridge and began to attack. Antigonus, however, was possessed of Heracles' strength while wrestling Kerberos, the Hound of Hades. He took 6,000 cavalry and then charged down the hill with incredible speed. The two cavalry forces crashed, and Alcetus was defeated. He ordered the cavalry to retreat, and moved back to the phalanx, sustaining heavy losses. The Antigonid forces began to descend on the remnants of the Perdican force, and the phalanx had no time to form up. Thus they took their most desperate and difficult decision to surrender. Alcetus escaped with local Pisidians and fled to the city of Temessos. However, the local population wanted to hand him over to Antigonos, so Alcetus committed suicide. The Perdican upstarts were now completely defeated. While all this had been happening, Eumenes remained trapped in Nora, struggling to find a way out of the fight. Antigonus returned with the full might of his armies, but continued to have difficulties getting into the city. Inside, Eumenes had maintained a strict fitness regimen by making makeshift gyms for his soldiers. Thus, despite being outnumbered and trapped, morale among Eumenes' men was high. It took over a year of negotiations, but eventually some sort of deal was struck, and messengers were dispatched with details of peace deals for Eumenes. Antigonos was also not keen on killing Eumenes, thinking him a skilled general to have by his side. The messengers made their way to Macedonia, where Antipater had moved back to, alongside his son Cassander, his ally Polyperchon, and the family of Alexander, including his widow Rushanek and son Alexander IV. Barsani was likely at Pergamon at this time. The messengers reached Pella, but shocking news awaited them. Antipater had died at age 81 and chosen Polyperchon over his son Cassander for his successor as regent. Cassander was angry and demanded the position. Thus, the Second War of the Diadochi, with new alliances, was about to begin. The First War of the Diadochi was a titanic whirlwind, with one more partition, the deaths of major players, incredible betrayals, and absolutely chaotic geopolitics. This was only a taste of things to come. Thousands of nations of the former Achaemenid Empire were now involved in a large geopolitical game with highly ambitious Greek generals. As Cassander and Polyperchon brandished their sarissai, all the other Diadochi began to hedge their bets. Eumenes was bound to continue his own ambitious journey by getting involved in the fight, as was Antigonos. The Second War of the Diadochi is going to be even more destructive and chaotic than the last, and even more factions and reshuffles will take place. The Macedonian generals saw the wealth of Babylon, Memphis, and Antioch, and all wanted to be kings or serve a favourable king. This showdown of machismo and carnage will continue for decades to come, and not even the 1,000 pantheons of the people of the empire know what the conclusion will be. This series will soon continue, so to ensure you don't miss it, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.